Welcome to Saturday versus Sunday. I'm Geoff Dover. With me is John Barban. Let's talk football.
All right, we're going to talk about how to fix college football, or Joel Klatt's at least proposals, along with other people's concepts of what needs to be changed and what needs to be fixed in
Yeah, so
college football.
essentially this is a review. You told me to watch this YouTube
hmm
clip. I'm
Yeah.
really glad you did. Because I've seen a lot of people like say, like, oh, you know what would be better for college football? And it's like making it 5 downs instead of 4. Like there's some really ridiculous suggestions out there. But this episode, and kudos to Joel Klatt, because I haven't watched a lot of his stuff, but this is the specific episode is Commissioner Joel Klatt's fixes for college football.
Yeah.
It came out a little while ago. If you haven't, our listeners, if you haven't watched it, you can feel free to go ahead and watch it. It was a really interesting take, but this is essentially going to be our review show about
Of
some of
his
the
stuff.
stuff, that he said and whether
hmm
or not we agree with it, because there's some really interesting takes on this episode.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the reseed the playoffs so we don't
Yeah,
get like Boise State getting a bye and stuff like that. I
no,
mean,
it
that
was
was part
huge,
of it, but it was really
huge
this
changes.
this slow creep of college football turning into something like the NFL, but not really.
Yeah,
But are we losing the specialness of the regular season?
yeah,
So I like his takes were really focused on preserving what was great or what is good about college football.
yep,
Yeah, obviously he works for a network where they're part of his interest is the deal that his network has
hmm,
broadcasting football, but you could tell he wasn't biased about everything that's good for Fox or
yeah,
whatever network he's on. It
no,
was just what's good for college football.
yeah,
And one of his major, I mean, where do you want to start? Just
yeah.
with the
You
cal
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
One of his major fixes, or one of his focuses, was the calendar, like
Yes,
the way the season unfolds.
yeah,
I think this is my favorite thing. I think
okay,
it's radical, but I love it.
yeah,
He wants the playoffs to end at the Rose Bowl. By definition, the championship game is always at the Rose Bowl, always on New Year's Day. Oh, that's a great idea,
I thought that was
because
fantastic. It was an
the
amazing idea, and in his comparisons of, like, in the NFL, you win the Super Bowl, or in Major League Baseball, like you win the World Series, and so to call the national championship the Rose Bowl, like they won the Rose Bowl, and to put it in that category, I thought was brilliant, because
Mhm.
it's one of the few things that separate college football from the NFL or other sports, really, because the Rose Bowl is a unique college football thing. So I thought that was a fantastic
Mhm.
idea. So
Because
just
nowadays,
the
if you
name
win the Rose
Rose
Bowl,
Bowl.
what is that?
Well, I mean, it's varied. It used to be just the Rose Bowl. Now it was one of the semifinal games. It could be a quarterfinal game. Like
But
it
sometimes it's also the championship game. Like it's now just
yeah,
it's almost meaningless now. The Sugar
yeah,
Bowl, who cares? It's just all it is a playoff game now.
yeah,
So that makes it special again, which I
yeah.
think's
And
awesome.
and it is. He's right that it's. And you've always said this too. The game looks amazing, like played there,
It's
like in the
always the best
stadium.
looking game because of the
Yeah,
lighting. Yeah.
yeah. And the key thing was ending it on January 1st, because that's before the next semester starts in the academic year. That
Mhm.
was important too. And it goes too long now. So yeah, so you need more time between the end of the season to get all the playoff stuff in, and then you would finish January 1st for the Rose Bowl, which I thought was great.
Yeah, and we don't have that big layoff anyways.
Yeah,
You don't need all this extra time because now it's going to turn into the thing's going to end like on the 20th of January.
yeah, it's
Stupid.
ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that makes everything harder. Like that because the school year started, because
Mhm.
of the transfer window stuff, which we'll get to in a minute. Like it makes it's too many, that causes more problems than anything else. So ending it on the
Mhm.
first is actually a good thing. And the other key thing with that, my other co-favorite thing that he suggested, Army Navy game, first game of the year. I thought
100%.
that was amazing, because that
Standalone by
weekend,
itself, week
yep,
0.
that weekend right now, because it's after, like, or before the conference championship, that's a key weekend for playoffs time now,
Which
right?
now they have games along
Yeah,
with it, which kind
exactly.
of kills its
It
specialness anyways.
totally kills it. So and it deserves to be a standalone game. And there's a lot of examples like that. Like when they play the neutral site game in Atlanta, but like Clemson and Georgia or something like that, like those are big time games. But to be able to start with Army Navy before anything else happens, and it's the most important game to those two teams, like by far, right? So, and that's what they're planning anyway, like all spring ball and over the summer, in the fall camp, like they're just thinking about that game anyway. And so I think it was a fantastic thing to free up a whole week in like November or in December, to have playoff games
Yeah.
and to start and I think it'd be even better for Army Navy to be at the beginning. Everyone can't wait for college football to start and to celebrate the Army Navy game like that, because otherwise you're sort of, some fans are like, it's just an off week before the conference championship game or something,
Yeah.
and this is like the
Yeah.
only football going. It was amazing.
Yeah. And now that they're in conferences, that game, like their season was decided before that game.
Yeah.
Like the game had zero impact on the
Yep.
season. Here, it could mean something.
Yep.
And like you said, everyone's starved for college football at that point. It'll be like the highest rated game because at least you get to watch something.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter if they're in the race for the national championship. It'll just be a spectacle worth starting the season with. I thought that was a great idea.
No, I thought that was amazing. Like, and it really, it really should consider that, because
God, that was such a good idea.
It would really help out like the scheduling and stuff.
Yep.
Now, in terms of okay, so what's something else that you liked?
Something else that I like. Well, the playoffs. He had a revamp of the playoffs, which I thought was great. So play-in game. So a certain number of automatic bids for the big conferences, but also play-in games.
Yeah.
So besides winning your conference title, teams like the third and fourth place team get placed in a play-in game in the conferences, which I thought was awesome. And all of that stuff's on campus in 2 rounds of playoff games on campus. I thought was also a great idea.
Yeah. So in summary, he's essentially expanding from the 12-game playoff to 14. Mm-hmm. For example, we'll just pick the SEC. The SEC, the conference championship game, the winner is in and the runner-up is in. Okay, so those 2 teams are in. But then also, like 3 would play 6, I think, in the SEC standings, and 4 plays 5, and those would be the play-in games, where you have to win that game in order to be in the playoffs to start after that. And it was similar for the Big Ten too.
Big Ten. Then I think he had the Big 12 and the ACC having less, the championship winner is in, and then they also still have a play-in game on top of that.
I think, yeah,
something like that.
He covered a lot of stuff in a short period of time. Now, here's my only concern about that. I love the idea. I think the play-in, in the play-in game, I think it's a really good idea, and you'd have time to do it now. If Army Navy's at the beginning, you'll be able to, and this will all get done before January 1st, which is good. The only thing I wasn't sure about how that's going to work is and I want to make sure I get this right. I'm just looking at sort of like this year, like what would have happened in the SEC. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams that either had a 6-2 record or 5-3. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be hard to pick that 3 through 16.
Oh, well, but they'd have their reasons why someone gets put higher for win points or something like that, or the strength of schedule.
Right, but it's still going to be like someone's going to be left out. Someone's
that'll never end.
I understand that, but there might be a way of who makes the playoffs where it's not decided by a committee. I think would be best. Now, I don't know if we're going to be able to get to that just because there's so many different teams and conferences and things like that. But that was the only thing I could see like having an issue with his setup for that.
At least it pushes the whole committee's choice further and further away from the final few teams.
Yes.
Like if the committee has to decide, no, not necessarily. You could objectively say the tiebreak comes down to the strength of schedule. Like you could have objective ways around it.
Yeah, there'll still be like win-loss record against the other teams, like because a lot of them would have won or lost with each other, right? So like that'd be the first tiebreak, and then you could do ranking or there's many ways of doing it, but if college football is the only sport where a committee votes on if someone makes it or not, right? Like every other sport, it's where you finish in the standings and it's not up to debate.
Well, and at least these changes really minimize their voting influence.
Well, and I love the idea of the play-in game to get into the playoffs. I think that's fantastic because everyone would like to see like that. This year, that would have been Tennessee again. Like I don't know about the tiebreakers, so forgive me on that. Right. But Texas and Georgia would have been in, right? Because Texas won and Georgia lost, and then the Tennessee would have faced South Carolina, and Bama would have played LSU.
That'd have been wild. That'd be so good.
Amazing.
Now the other thing is the importance of the championship game is for seeding in the bye.
Yeah,
So
which is
winning the
still good.
championship game would have mattered to get
Yep.
the bye versus now you're just both in and it's literally just an exhibition. It almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So in this case, you're earning the bye by
Yeah.
winning a big
And
conference.
Penn State would have played Iowa, and Ohio State would have played Illinois for their playing games, which would have been super interesting,
Crazy. That'd be
right?
great.
So yeah,
Right. So then the other thing on the schedule was a 9-2-1 model. You
yep,
play 9 conference games, which I think you have to do. I would
okay,
much rather see that. Two games against teams where it's to support the team that makes less money, which is kind of
a
what
group
they're
of
already
5.
doing. A group of 5 or I don't know. I don't know if he's even just eliminating FCS, but at least group of 5. I think get rid of the FCS stuff.
Yeah,
And then one game out of conference against a power conference,
yep.
which a lot of teams have that built in anyways, like Florida State, Clemson, South
Well,
Carolina.
but
That
that's not who they would be playing, right? Did you remember how he was going to sort that out? That was going to be the draw with the tiers and stuff.
Oh yes, never mind. That's even
Yeah,
better. That's
yeah.
even
So,
better. Well,
well,
but
yes and no. Okay,
that's also the his larger point of athletic departments not making their own schedule,
yeah,
which
okay.
I
So
think that has to go too.
right, so there's a lot of layers to this. Okay, so the first thing was his point was that what makes it hard to rank the teams by a committee
Mhm.
is because someone has an easier schedule compared to someone else. And one of the
Yeah.
examples he gave was Texas, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's like, so this would be a way of solving that. I don't think it does. I think that no matter what you do, if everyone played 9 conference games, you're still going to struggle with the strength of schedule thing,
Mhm.
because 9 conference games in the SEC on any given year is going to be harder, easier than 9 conference games in the Big Ten or the ACC on any
Yeah.
given year.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
someone's playing well, if someone isn't playing well, at the beginning of the season, we thought Florida State was going to be good. They were terrible. That significantly changed people's strength of schedule,
Yeah.
like and all that, So I don't think having 9 conference games actually fixes everything, like anything really, for comparing teams across conferences or anything like that. I thought that the and the when he said that you could, okay, so it's who you would play for that last, the important game was going to be like a draw. And so like because if you had, what I did like is that if you're a better team, then you have to play a better team in your matchup, and if you're a worse team, you could get someone picked out of low.
Oh, right.
and i
Yes. Yes.
and I
You're
liked
talking
how,
about the out of conference game against another power
yeah,
conference.
and
Yes.
I like the idea of having it like as a lottery
Lottery.
system,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then like, and how he described it, like he was like, okay, next team up, like Oregon, and then who are you going to play? And then the ball comes in, and it was Tennessee, and you're like, that's
But
cool,
the
like that's,
choices are other teams at that level.
yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
Like that's fine. But that was my first concern, is that because he talks about the tradition and he talks about like keeping it for the fans. And so I think it's going to be critical to keep the rivalry games, right? So in his system, it seemed like there were going to be no rivalry games, which is going to be a real problem. Like
Well,
Florida
then
has to
that's
play
where
Florida
Saturday
State.
versus Sunday would make a modification.
Yes, our
Yeah.
official modification is that that conference game would be slotted. I think I would go 8 conference games and then do the 2 at large that he was talking about, but
I
you could
like
keep
that.
one for the rivalry.
One's a
So that's,
rivalry, and one is a lottery.
yeah, yeah, I
That's
think that'd be
cool.
good. I thought that'd be good. I think that fixes it, because then Florida plays Florida State, Georgia plays Georgia Tech, South Carolina plays Clemson, and
Mhm.
then if Clemson had a good year, then that their other, group of 4 game is going to be a good matchup. And if South Carolina wasn't supposed to be good this year, then
Mhm.
their group of 4 game would have been a more reasonable one.
Yeah.
So like that would have been
So,
good.
but if we
So
haven't made it clear in his concept, the lottery, if you finish in the top 3 in your conference, in the lottery for your other group of 4 game, you're only being put in mixed with the other top 3 finishers. So you
yeah,
can't end up with like the 7th ranked team.
yeah,
You can only end up with one of the top 3 ranked teams if you're a top 3 ranked team in the
yeah,
SEC, let's say in the Big Ten. And then it just moves along. So you're for sure going to be playing somebody strong that
mhm,
finished. Also, I think the entire schedule should be made by a commissioner level
yeah,
office where
yeah,
it goes by whoever finished your strength, however high you finished last year, you get the hardest schedule next year
yeah. And
for
I
whatever
think
metric you like. To your point, you can't completely fix it because you would have thought Florida State was a
yeah,
highlight game on everyone's schedule this year. But anomalies aside, where a team completely falls off the wagon,
mhm,
it's kind of it seems as though more often than not you can count on the way a team finished last year well, it's all you can count on
Yeah,
to put
that's
them in as the harder teams on the schedule next year.
yeah, that's gonna happen every year no matter what,
Right,
right? Like
right. Somebody's going to
you
fall
would
off.
yeah, like you would have some teams pick Vandy this year because they thought they were gonna be easier and they were really good this year,
Sure
right?
not.
So like
Yeah.
so you can't it's gonna happen both ways either way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the I do agree with the I remember talking like some athletic director types, and they were very adamant about controlling their schedule because it's all about the budget, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But really, when in my opinion, the main thing they talk about is the number of home games because they make more money for home games than anything else because there's concessions, there's the season tickets, the boosters and stuff like that. So they I remember the one athletic director said one time it's like we have to have 6 home games like that no matter what. It has to be 6 or more like and otherwise financially we can't do it. And so that to me doesn't, it's not that when you did the draw thing because like the way he was doing it, the first one you picked was the home game, the home team, and then the second ball that came up was going to be who you were playing, right?
Mhm.
So you potentially would have like in the draw system, you could get 2 road games for those 2 things instead of like one home and one away or something. But but even with the 8 conference games and the one against a group of 5, you'd still be able to generate 6 home games. So
Yeah.
I think that I don't think that'd even be an issue. So I fully support having a centralized schedule maker based on that's how most other sports do it based on your
Yeah.
strength of schedule the one before and it's things can still happen but it's that'd be a good way to do it.
And now with the playoff and so many more teams that have a chance at it, this need to have pad the schedule with a bunch of cupcake games where everyone shows up at 5-1 by
Yeah,
the sixth game of the season. I mean, I actually thought about this the other after Klatt's thing, and I thought, oh, by between playing the weaker teams in your conference, so like when a powerhouse team like Georgia or Texas or Ohio State um, plays at least a couple of the weaker teams in their conference, just because you're just not going to end up playing all the tough ones,
yeah,
and the 2 or 3 group of 5 games,
yeah,
they they're automatically at roughly 6 wins almost every
yeah,
season, but 6 guaranteed wins that were no challenge. Then in a 12-game season, you're really only talking about 6 maybe competitive games.
yeah,
And if you finish the season 10-2, really you could say you actually just went 4-2 in the competitive
yeah,
games. So that's
yeah.
that's not that impressive at all.
And there's enough crappy group of 4 teams that you can like, if you had like Vandy was a good example. Like they had a bad record 2 years ago. So then this year they would have scheduled like Maryland or like Oklahoma State or something, you know what I mean? Like it would have
Mhm.
been it's still a group of 4 team,
What,
you
Maryland
know,
and Oklahoma State? What are you talking about? Neither of those are group of 4.
they're
Oh, yes, sorry. You're right. You're
yeah,
right. They're
major
group of 4.
conference
Wait.
stuff,
Right, right,
right?
right.
But
Right, right,
so
right.
like but like you could still play them, and that's at least a group of 4 game, and they're not great, but like
Yeah.
it's better than like Sam Houston or something. You know what I mean? No offense to Sam Houston fans, but
Yeah.
like that would be that's a better matchup. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Part of the overarching thesis is a centralized body needs to start getting control of this. And that's when we get into the NIL mess and the transfer
oh
portal
yeah.
mess that needs to be cleaned up.
Well, okay, so the last thing I'll say, well, not the last thing. Okay, so another thing I thought was awesome, and this is where it's going, is they're going to need a collective bargaining agreement and revenue sharing, like with the players, like
Yes.
that just has to happen. It's too, but right now having like collectives or other groups control money and who goes to what team and stuff is really messed up. So if they just did a revenue sharing collective bargaining agreement, that would really, they're not. I think we can finally let go of the student athlete thing, like
Yeah.
they're getting paid to play, and so therefore there should be a contract that would really help the opt-outs too, because like that's they would just lose money then, like if they're
And we
if
know
they're
they've always been getting paid to play, but now at
yeah.
least it's up front and on the
so
table
so
versus like this clandestine
yeah,
behind the scenes stuff.
so it's just go all in. It's going to be the revenue sharing collective agreement.
Well,
There
it
should be
is. Revenue
representative.
sharing's coming, and that
Yeah,
lawsuit, I was reading an article recently about that, and there's a couple of items that might hold it up, or at least they're worried that it might hold it up because now they're worried about the players having less power moving forward if they accept the settlement deal now. And this is part of a multi-billion-dollar
yeah,
lawsuit for paying players from before.
Yep.
who missed out on this. So there's the NCAA is done. First of all,
Mhm.
that entity has to just disappear and never come back.
Yeah.
And a new entity has to emerge that is gonna have all of the best interests, like for preserving the game for the fans. Like that's
Mhm.
like I want this to. I don't want this to just turn into the NFL. I want to keep as much of what was awesome about college football moving forward, which
Mhm.
is Klatt did a really good job of trying to thread that needle with his concepts here in this
Yeah.
show. And part of this is the centralized body has to get some kind of control on NIL, and the revenue sharing deal, I think, is a big part of it, so that it's not this disjointed thing where the collectives are throwing money around,
Yeah.
and it's not standardized from one team to another. Because the coaches, it's weird. How do you build a roster when you have no control over the financial incentive of your own roster? Right now,
Yeah.
it's a complete mess. The other thing is
Hold on,
NIL's bullshit. Yeah,
just to
go
that
ahead.
thing about the revenue sharing, I think it's really important.
Mm.
And I think that there'd be a way of doing it based on, because like it's not going to be the same between teams or conferences and like how much they should get or whatever. And you could might be a way of doing it versus like ratings or something. I don't know, but like there's there'd be a way of doing it, and I think it has to be like, I think the collective bargaining agreement thing would be really important, because I think that it should protect the players in some things, and especially with the suspensions and stuff. So no, I think it should happen, and it makes enough money that this is the right thing to do, I believe. So
Yeah.
I just think that that's the right thing. But you're right anyway. So keep going. The NIL, like just the individual collective thing is
Well,
really messed
players
up.
can actually
So
have real NIL. Deion Sanders
yeah,
brought this up. He's like, most players don't have NIL. He's got a
yeah,
couple of players who actually have real deals with real brands, and they're on actual commercials.
yeah,
So Shador and Travis are in actual commercials for different
yeah,
real, like food chains and whatever.
yep,
That's a real NIL deal. These collectives are bullshit. That is
yeah,
just pay for play.
yeah,
That's what the revenue sharing should cover, is the pay
yes,
for play.
yeah,
But players who really do have a name, an image, and a likeness worth selling,
yeah,
that's rare.
yeah.
Like
No,
all this. Have you seen the money Carson Beck is getting down in
yeah, it's
Miami?
ridiculous.
Now, is he really that marketable, or is that all just pay for play? I don't think anyone gives a shit about Carson Beck nationally for any sort of advertising. No one cares.
No, I
Like
know.
he's not getting. He's not going to be in national brands or anything like that. Or
No,
if he is, I bet you most people outside of hardcore football fans, or at least even Southeast football fans, like, oh, who's that again? Like
yeah,
if they saw him not in his uniform, not with
yeah,
Beck written on his back, in some
yeah.
sort of commercial, I bet you half the country's like, who is that? Right?
Yeah, the best NIL example I ever heard was early on when the thing just started, and because everyone was like, "This is going to be a disaster, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
ruin the sport and all this stuff." And the best example I heard was that there was a bar in Tallahassee, like by Florida State, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and they paid for like one of the defensive ends, like a linebacker, a running back, like a wide receiver or something. They paid them each like it was like $2,000 or $5,000 or something like that to come and sign autographs on like a Tuesday from 4 to 6 or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. And it was normally be at a time where the bar's dead, and instead it was packed, and they made money. The bar made money
Yeah,
by
that's a
having
real NIL.
right like that. And I
Yeah.
was like, and I remember one of the players saying like, "What is this like? What's the problem with this?" Or so, like there's nothing wrong with this, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was a great use of like that. Absolutely should happen. So
Yeah.
I think it was $2,000. That would have been a lot for
And
five
it's
grand
most
each, but
likely
it's
going to be local for most of these guys.
yeah,
Just something
yeah,
local where people know who they are.
right. So
Very
like
few of them are nationally recognizable, worth any
yeah.
money for an NIL. So
Okay. So one other,
it's
so I keep going.
yeah.
Do you have anything
No,
else
no,
with that? Okay. So
no.
one of the things that Klatt mentioned was that, and which I really agree with, is the one transfer window. So this is tough because having one in January, like the players obviously would want at least two, because they want to be able to transfer like whenever they want. And right now they could transfer somewhere in January, and then, when the spring football starts and they're like, "Hey, this guy's probably going to start and you're not," they can transfer again in May, and then go somewhere else in August, right? But because of that, like you're as a coach, like you're constantly recruiting your own team, you're constantly trying to,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's going to be asking for more money all the time. So I think it's having one transfer window in May, I think was better. And it'd be better for the fans too, because it'd have less turnover, and it still gives you a chance to move. Like, you could still leave if you're in a really bad situation. You just have to commit to 1 year there, which is
Well,
fine.
it's such an unrealistic situation to be able to transfer every year in a career that should only last 4 years.
Yeah, well, and twice in a year, right? Like, because that's what happens.
Well, and twice. Guys going back and forth.
Yes, or someone leaves
year.
in January, they go somewhere else, and then they leave again in May, right? So, like, that's the so now the only thing that I disagree with what he said is that he was trying to limit the number of times you could transfer.
Oh, I agree with that too.
That's going to be tough. I don't think you can do that, because he had one. He's like, everyone gets one, and I'm like, I don't.
Well, I agree with that, because it's only a 4-year total thing, anyways.
I know.
And bouncing. The thing is, it doesn't set them up for any realistic situation in the entire rest of their life. You don't get to just have your cake and eat it too like this. This is a completely unrealistic situation. First of all, these kids, most of them are financially illiterate. Whether or not they even grew up in a wealthy or not wealthy household,
most people are. We're not picking on these kids. Most people are financially illiterate.
I was a moron at 17 and 18. I didn't understand credit card. I didn't know that everyone had a mortgage on a house. I thought people just bought houses. I didn't know. And my mom worked in the mortgage department in the bank. And I was like, I made it to like second year college before I realized everyone is paying a mortgage for a house. I just thought people saved up and bought a house. That's how illiterate I was.
Yeah.
And my mom worked in a bank, and I didn't know that.
I had no idea how much you actually pay on interest, like on a $300,000 mortgage.
Triple.
It was going to be like, because I got it at a really low rate. So, but we ended up paying $440,000 on a $300,000 mortgage.
If you paid out the whole thing,
right. And I'm like, oh, that's terrible. Like that, and I'll never forget the bank guy saying, he's like, well, don't look at that. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, just
like,
don't.
That's ridiculous advice.
Nothing to see here. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all this.
But that's
so
the cost of money, right?
Yeah. That we're not.
So we're not picking on any type of. Where I'm just saying most 18-year-olds don't know anything about money. First of all, they've never paid taxes.
Yeah.
And they're not ready to see, especially if you get some real amount of money and not just a part-time summer job, and where you pay like a nominal amount of taxes. Yeah. But if all of a sudden you're in the hundreds of thousands, the government takes half. Yeah. No matter where you live in North America, the government's taking fully half of that. Yeah. And just try to not give them that half. It's not going to go well. And you could just destroy your credit for like for your future. No, so also you're handing this amount of money to kids who don't even have fully developed brains. Like our brains aren't finished developing till we're 25 years old. Now, these kids are going to end up with an amount, some of them anyways, are going to end up with an amount of money with no real emotional or psychological control over it. Like our impulse control at 8, biologically, we know this. When you're in your teens, you're at your highest risk tolerance. Like you'll act much more risky in your late teens and early 20s than you will in your late 20s, early 30s. Right. Like that part of your brain that has shown you like, oh, I shouldn't push this edge. That arrives later in life. But and that you'll be more responsible just by nature with your money later in life. But when you hand all that money to someone who's 18 years old and they just go buy a car when it maybe should have been invested, and buy a much cheaper car, and also make sure you pay your taxes. Like all of that can go so wrong so quickly.
Right. But just to be clear,
hang on top of that, and this idea that I'm going to transfer and get more, and I'm going to transfer and get more. And at some point, coaches are going to be like, you're not reliable. I can't trust you at all.
Yeah.
And this mercenary nature doesn't exist anywhere else in their life. If they're good enough to get to the NFL, they're going to get slapped right in the face when they're like, no, you signed a contract. You're here for as long as the contract says so. You're not transferring anywhere. Yeah. Like you don't, it's the wrong message to send a bunch of kids that you can just have your cake, eat it too. The world caters to you. That is bullshit. And that's just, they're starting off with the complete wrong sense of how things are going to go. And for the very, very few who make it to the NFL, that how it really works in a real business, right? Like the NFL, in a real business that's churning serious dollars. Not that college football isn't, but this isn't how it's going to end with college football. It's going to evolve. And right now they're in this weird, uncontrolled space that's not like any other part of life. And for the ones who don't go pro, and go get an actual career job,
of them, right? To be honest, like
99% of them won't go pro, and they're going to go they're going to be told when to show up to work, how much they're going to get made, and they can't just bail on work. Like they're being taught the complete wrong lesson that if you don't get what you just bail and someone else will give it to you. It's the complete wrong lesson to teach them for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, and so just to be clear, like we're not saying like the quarterback at Oregon like doesn't deserve $1 million. Like if they, with the revenue sharing, like, and if that's how much, like they could get that, and that's fine.
It's whatever the market will bear.
It's whatever the market will bear, and we totally support them getting that money.
Sure.
Like, right. But what we don't support is the idea that like the grass is always greener. It's better for me somewhere else. I could get money, more money somewhere else. So that's a reason to leave every semester essentially until I get more money. And yeah, because you're right. It's not how it's going to be. And,
No.
but it's, so the only thing I think that it'd be nice if they, old people only transferred once. I think that'd be better for the fans because you'd be more connected with the people in your team and stuff. But I don't know if they'll ever. This is never going to happen because like they'll be able to transfer each year if they want. But I just think at least limiting it to one time of the year would be better. So, but
I just there needs to be a contract. If you show up somewhere and you get revenue share, you have to see your contract through.
Yeah.
And that because that's how all business in the world works. You don't just get to, like that one Florida player who was demanding a certain amount of playing time. Like, get the hell out of here. Who the hell do you think you are? You're not Ray Lewis. Even Ray Lewis doesn't get to do that.
No, that's true.
And that alone just shows you how out of touch they are with reality in the current system. They actually thought they could tell the coach how much their playing time should be, what they want to play on third down. They want to do this. They want to do that. But you're not that important. You just get out and try that in the rest of your life. So that's what I mean. The fact that was actually a thing, and it's not like he's the only one. That's just the one we heard about.
Yeah.
If that's actually happening, that's the lesson they're learning. They're like, I'm that special. This is no, you're not. And again, the ultimate team sport, the team, it's not you bigger than the team, but that's what they're being taught.
And just and again, it feels like I don't want to get across we're not picking on college football players or college football athletes or anything like that, because it's actually most people aren't financially literate, like you said. And this happens in other examples. I remember I think it was last summer or last off season for the Major League Baseball. Scott Boras is a famous agent, and he famously like held his players out because they're like, well, they deserve more money, and like no one paid it. So they didn't get signed, like, and spring training already started and stuff. And they some of them took contracts that were a lot less than they thought. And that's what happens. Like, it's when a
calculated gamble, probably just to see. Yeah.
But I mean, but like, it was more of like, the way it was handled too, was like, you will get this money. And then they absolutely did not.
Well, and that's the other thing. The agents,
the market wasn't there.
A lot of these kids don't, on top of financial illiteracy, a lot of these kids have never signed a contract. They've never been involved in any of this. Another thing Klatt came up with is like some kind of regulation on the agents. And some people they're just being taken. Some of these kids are being taken advantage of by people in their life who all represent you, and they don't actually know what they're doing.
Nope.
And a good agent they'll earn their money. They'll earn their percent, but they should have some skill at putting together a deal that's best for you, that works out in a way that you understand the deal you just signed, and you're not just completely getting hosed. Like this famously happened to Mike Tyson when he got big. People were fleecing him left, right, and center because he just didn't have anyone he could trust. And everyone around was like, no, I got you. And he just got screwed all the way through.
Well, and I remember even Klatt gave some examples of some guys in the NFL now that are trying to get out of the deals they signed when they were like a sophomore or senior in high school. Because like some of them were like,
some of them are in perpetuity straight through until they're and that's insane. That's another thing about this illiteracy thing. Not just financial literacy, but contractual illiteracy. Like in my business, I've signed a couple deals that 10 years later, I'm like, oh, that was a bad one. But this at the very beginning of when I got into like running my own business, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't have enough resource to know to go to another counsel saying, can you tell me, is this a good or bad deal? I couldn't tell. And so, it can affect you for a long, long time if you just put pen to paper the wrong way around. So some kind of regulation on who can even be an agent for these guys, that's another thing that has to happen. So we're currently living in the Wild West of this, and all of it needs to evolve towards a more NFL style model. Like the NFL can deal with this It even has like the franchise tag, like these weird situations where
Mm-hmm.
like I don't want to fully commit to this guy, but he can bank on himself for 1 year on the
Mm-hmm.
franchise, that sort of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
the NFL's very evolved into this. There's ways to
Mm-hmm.
deal with all these specific situations. Like, for example, I agree with Klatt on you only get one transfer, but there may be a way that if your coach leaves and you're like, but I only came here because he promised. So maybe if the coach leaves within a number of months of you signing on a team, you
Mm-hmm.
can be like, okay, well then now that's void. I get that
Yeah.
plus my normal
Or
transfer.
offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator.
Yeah. Now
Like
that money's on the line, if part of why you showed up because this was the best fit for me with this coach, and that coach is gone.
Yeah.
Now I'm just flapping in the wind with this other coach. That wasn't my agreement.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really hard because and there's some players. I remember one of the things that came up was the one kid went to one school and then his mom got sick, so he wanted to go back, so he could be close, but then transfer.
Yeah.
That's like, it's, it'd be really, that's the other thing. Like a lot of the stuff he was suggesting, part of the reason why stuff like that isn't happening is because it would take like a multi-thousand person conglomerate to run it. Like just the people to monitor, just the people to generate, to do the scheduling, or like to regulate the agents like that. That's
I don't know.
whole...
I think ChatGPT can do it all.
Yes, it's a good
just
call.
AI can schedule this in about 2 seconds.
Okay, ChatGPT could absolutely do the schedule, but for the agent thing, like we're going to license a new set of agents for like high school.
Well,
and
I don't know,
college
man.
and
ChatGPT just won a court case too, or AI just won a court case.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we should do. Maybe that's. Listen. Maybe we're coming up with a brilliant idea right now. It's going to be the Dover and Barban ChatGPT agency.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. AI
and
agency.
we'll represent any high school, college player, anybody, and everybody.
Yeah.
And we want a very small percentage. It won't be in perpetuity.
Nope.
And it's because we're going to have about 26,000 clients.
Yeah.
And,
like that.
We'll just run it through the AI, and that'd be great.
And then it'll spit out what's best for you.
Yeah.
Yep. Don't worry. There'll be nothing in the code about what's best for me in Dover.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just what's best for you. All right. So
do you have anything
goofing
else?
aside, that all of that needs to be sorted out, that transfer portal stuff and the representation for the players. Even I don't know if he even touched on this, but some financial literacy training too, for what they're getting themselves into.
That should be for college players.
That should be for all people.
Kids, any humans under the age of 18. Yeah. No, absolutely. We've talked about this before. This has nothing to do with football, but like they're people being financially aware in what goes into building a house, like, and there's a lot of stuff that like would be really beneficial for a lot of people, but it's
all right. So what else?
Last
what
thing real fast. It was the only other thing that he said that I sort of disagreed with was that he made the point of when you're competing, like you're in season or something, you shouldn't have to focus on like roster building. And that's something that, because college football never used to be like that. Like it used to be for years and years, like you couldn't transfer. It was really punitive to transfer. And you're stuck with a team. They wouldn't let you out of a letter of intent. You couldn't go to another team in the conference, like stuff like that. And so you literally only had to worry about competition. And so that's part of his reasoning for having the one transfer window and, one-time transfers, so that you don't have to, you shouldn't have to focus on roster building and competing at the same time. And that's the only thing I disagreed a little bit, because it is like that in pro sports. In pro sports, there is a trade deadline. Like in the season, you can change your roster anytime in season. But there should be a deadline for when it can't happen afterward, like after a certain time, right? So you can't overhaul your roster 1 week before the playoffs. But so that does happen.
So one transfer window once per year.
Yeah, one transfer in May, and then but it was more to his point where like I disagree with his point where you don't have to worry about the roster building while you're competing. Like, because that absolutely still happens.
He was more talking about 2 transfer windows.
I get that, but I'm just like, my point is that, like, for example, the Lakers are competing right now and they just made a huge change to their roster.
Right.
So
it
absolutely does happen.
Agreed.
So
yeah, but we're going from no control to now we have to have some control.
Correct. I'll give you that. But that was the only other, it would be pretty cool that if your team, you have a good college football team. I'll just pick the Gators, so I'm a Florida fan. They've got a good team. and 2 weeks in, they injure their running back, and for whatever reason, they don't have a backup, and they could make a trade with a team, and get a running back and could still, I don't know. I'm not saying there should be trades in college football, but just something like, I can
Trades. That's actually kind of cool.
I could understand something, like
But the
that.
thing is, if this gets consolidated and there is some centralized governing body that actually has a clue what it's doing, not the NCAA, and there is revenue sharing, maybe there is trades.
Yeah,
now obviously both players have to agree. You can't just say you're not in our college anymore.
But like you could swap contracts and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, these things are going to change. We know things are going to change. The playoffs not going to stay the same. I think reseeding is important.
Reseeding, yeah. We really glossed over that. That's actually one of the more important things, I think, about it. And it would have really made a difference. But I think expanding it too and having the playing games I thought were really good. And everyone was worried about the jeopardy of the regular season, and that's absolutely has not been a problem.
No, I thought the regular season was still really good this year. And I think the overall consequence to the other bowl games, I think they're just going to become less and less relevant to the point where I don't even know if they're going to bother with them at some point.
Yeah, it's still going to be a ratings thing. We talked about this before. As long as people watch them, it's something. You made a point out, which I thought was really good. In every other sport, your season always ends in a loss, right? Like if you're in the playoff, if you make the playoffs, your season will end in a loss, right? So the idea of finishing the season with a bowl win is nice.
Yeah.
So like it's a reason to keep it, but I think it'll have to be, revive, like it's there.
This is something that he didn't quite touch on, but how do you, so some of the more interesting and fun games we watched this year were the non-playoff bowl games.
Yeah.
So the Illinois South Carolina game was pure entertainment with Bielema getting under Beamer's skin there, and the game itself was great. And that I found that pure entertainment. The Alabama Michigan game was really interesting big brands and again, just inexplicably like Jalen Milroe. You just don't know what you're going to get, but you could tell there was NFL talent all over that field. So some of the non-playoff games bowl games were still good, but we're down to like maybe a half dozen that are worth watching. All the rest are, it sucks because there's no one there. Like at least those games, the stands were more or less full.
Yeah.
But just the TV product is really underwhelming when the stands are half empty too. So there's something there he didn't really touch on, but something has to be done there too. If they're going to even keep these other bowl games going, there's got to be more incentive than, and here are the other games. Like there's got to be something more than that.
Here's the Dover and Barban commissioner thought on that.
Okay.
So the playoffs we've already covered. The play-in games I think are excellent. We just do that. Then the bowl games, the bowl schedule comes out, and it'll be the same. It's like 6 and 6, and you qualify for a bowl game. But at that point, there's a team vote on whether we play the game or not. So because the only time when a bowl game sucks is when one team totally doesn't show up or has 15 opt-outs and they're not into it. Right. So if there's a Washington UCLA bowl game, okay. But we do every player votes. And if the majority doesn't want to play the game, doesn't happen. So, and then UCLA, like if the majority of their players say they want to play the game, then we sub someone else in there, and then that way you get two teams that at least want to play in the game.
I don't know if that'll work with the way that TV deals, and they kind of want certain teams. They want their choice there.
I'm sure they do, but they want, when they want Washington, UCLA, and the bowl game shows up and Washington has 15 opt-outs and they're clearly not into it, they don't want that either.
Well, Marshall got fined for bailing on that game.
Right.
And their response was, we had no players.
We had
no coach and no players.
No,
that's the other thing. Like the coaches half the teams don't even have their coach anymore. So
I think it's optional. Like, I think it's like, if you want to do it, you can. And then that way the only teams that are in bowl games then want to be there.
Or the other way around that is though all of those non-playoff bowl games start the next season. You start the season with that game. It's just to make the game worth watching.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because nobody watches these games. You know how starved everyone is for games at all. At the end of the season,
did they count for the regular season then of the next one?
No, they don't count for the regular season. They're just, I don't know. They don't, put it this way, they don't count for anything. They don't mean anything. No one cares about the Mayo Bowl or the Cheez-It. Like, oh, I can't wait to dump the Cheez-Its on no one cares.
The winning coach does care if they win or lose the Mayo Bowl, because that's a lot of mayo put on you. So other than that.
Incentive, okay, all of the money and all of that stuff, fine, the same. But I'll bet you any money those games are more highly watched if they start the next season.
Interesting.
Well, first of all, you're getting, at least 2 teams with at minimum, even whatever, a 6-6 record, if not better. So you're at least starting with somewhat of a competitive matchup. All right, how about this? Instead of, while you're just waiting for the next round of the playoffs and you just randomly watch Alabama versus Michigan, imagine starting next season with Alabama versus Michigan. It's kind of cool.
That is. Yeah. It is.
And you're telling me that won't be a highly watched game at that point? So because normally the season doesn't start with that many good matchups.
Right. So now the season would be like, let's say like August 23rd would be Army Navy. And then like August 30th would be all the bowl games. And then like September 7th would be like your regular season conference games.
Sure. I mean, they're doing it already with these, the Chick-fil-A kickoff classic and all of these kickoff whatevers at neutral sites already. They're trying to like incent, and they're not even home games. Maybe make them home games and start the season with them. Or if they have to be fine, keep them as neutral sites, whatever. The other thing is you don't need to force the neutral site thing because it'll be warm. You could play that game in Ohio State.
Mostly
you
for
could
the
play
neutral
that game
site
wherever.
versus the home game is really the revenue thing. Because when you have a neutral site, the teams split the revenue 50-50 versus the home game, you get all the revenue kind of thing. So like that's why the neutral site thing works for the Chick-fil-A game and stuff like that, because they can split it. So
but you could make this one, you could force that split regardless.
Even if it's like at Michigan kind of thing.
Why not? Who cares where it is? If those are the rules if that's the financial incentive of a bowl game anyways, doesn't matter where it's played. It could be played at, some of them are played in college stadiums anyways. It's just not yours. Who cares?
Okay.
And it opens up the entire country to it because it'll be warm. So you could play that game in Wisconsin. You could play that game anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's got to be, I only forced watch some of those games so we could talk about it on the show here, but some of those games are unwatchable. It's like, who cares? Right.
For sure.
So trying to find any way to make them more interesting. So if you started the season with a bunch of relatively competitive games, that's kind of cool.
Yep.
And to your point, they either that decides your opening game of the next year and it becomes your next year's thing, or because it doesn't really make sense for it to contribute to the past year's thing. So now the only one year it'd be weird is the year it changes. But then after that, you start the year with this game, and that becomes part of your win totals for that year.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So in the end, it's still like, did you finish the season at whatever 13 and whatever? It's just, instead of the game happening at the end of the year, it's last year's results pick the game for you for next year.
Well, and it's not significantly different from kind of like what Klatt was saying. Like if you finish with a good record, you'd play a better team. That's sort of what the bowl games are trying to do anyway, right? Like it's the next 2 best teams in this next 2 best.
And if you expand the playoffs, you're taking 2 more teams away from these other games.
So that's fine. But like there's still a lot of good teams that like them, right? Because that's still just 14 or 18 different teams that are like there's that.
I don't know, but for anyone's listening, how many of the other bowl games did you really care about? If your team wasn't in it, how many of those other bowl games were you that interested in?
Most of them would say I'm not interested in them, right? But you're right. Like it's starting the next season with it, that automatically makes it more interesting. Yeah, you're right.
I don't know. So I don't know. Anything else?
No, that was it. I'd say it makes me miss college football, and I really wish I was getting geared up for the first game of the season, the Army Navy game. That'd be super amazing if that was at the beginning. But no, it's I think there was a really interesting. I'm really glad you suggested looking at it.
Yeah,
that Joel Klatt's thing, and I was really surprised at when I was listening to it, I'm like, oh man, like some of these ideas are really good. We'll link
to it in the show notes. Just if you haven't watched it and you're not sure what we're talking about, it's worth going to watch it.
There's every now and then I've heard there's a lot of people that say like, you know what I would do is I'd change this, and some people have some crazy ideas. But that was one of the few times where when I listened to that, I was like, man, some of these are amazing.
Well, and Klatt, I trust that Klatt's taking it serious. I mean, he really is taking it seriously for the fan experience, which is all we care about.
That's what we do. Yeah.
But you have to be realistic. It is a business. And the only reason we have all of this coverage is because there's so much TV money. So
Yeah.
how do you balance that? The two people I would make co-commissioners would be him and Josh Pate. I would just stick them in a room and say, don't leave until you have it sorted out.
Yeah.
And my guess is between the two of them, they'd actually sort this thing out in a way that we'd all be totally satisfied with.
Yeah. I might even throw Bud in there just because he was a lawyer from Cover 3, and because he might be helpful with some of the agent stuff. So
yeah, that's true. Okay, so so now we're building our committee. So those are the first three.
It's our College Football Commission.
And the commission. Do you think anybody? Well, and we'd be on it too, obviously.
Yeah, no, we're like associate directors. So but they're for sure
a contributing vote, but a small one.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else you think would be good in there? Somebody who seems to.
I can think of a decent number of people I don't want in there.
Oh, okay.
Does that help?
Well, the thing is, they'll also understand the media side. They're not dumb. They both. Pate works for CBS, and
I think
Klatt's Fox.
I think a lot of this is like you can have some really good ideas. This is logistically, I think it's just really tough. Because again, like the regulation of agents, like that's a one-line thing, and that seems like a multinational type of problem.
But it has to be done, though.
I get
all of this has to be done.
For sure.
The thing is, it has to be done and has been done at the highest levels.
Yeah,
I'll give you that. It will evolve into this. Yeah.
But I'm with you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
all right. Well, that's where we are so far. So that's the start of our postseason college talk, and we're just going to
leave in the comments if you ever saw another podcast or type of thing that you want to see us review, like you can always drop it in the comments, and we'll be because we're interested in looking at stuff for the off season too.
Yeah, and we'll be here every week with stuff. Just got to talk about it now that it's gone. We got to talk about it until it comes back. All right, catch you later.